Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Steve-O from Celtic World Order. Steve-O, welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. A Celtic World Order third appearance?
Yes, aye, going crazy.
There we go, it's a hat-trick. I think it's important for fan media platforms to come together, share ideas and discuss where the club is right now. Over the last wee while, I've been spoken to by a lot of people outside the bubble who have said, what have you got to complain about? Well, quite a lot actually. Right, so what I've decided to do is break it up into individual episodes so we can do deep dives into specifics within the club that we're unhappy with. And we're going to start off with the state of paradise. So here's my take on this one. About 2 years ago, I started doing my Wonder, and I love the idea of the Wonder. Yes, it was a total rip-off of Gary Neville's Overlap, where he went for a wee walk with his pals. And I thought to myself, I like the look of that. What better place to do it in than Celtic Park? So on a Monday morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, I would do my wee Wonder, and very, very quickly realised the stadium's looking dead tired.
Definitely.
And then since then, you mention it on the show, and people say, oh, you're looking for an excuse to moan or kick at Celtic and all the rest of it. There isn't an appetite for that discussion. But you fast forward 2 years, and you yourself put out a video. We actually played it on A Celtic State of Mind last week. And the reaction to that video, Steve-O, is completely different. People are saying, this is a disgrace that you've allowed our home, this stadium, which is world renowned, to get into such a state of disrepair. When did you notice it? And talk us through your own wander around the stadium and your findings.
So, as you said, I think it's important to point out these things. And as you'll say, when you do these fan media things, or whatever you want to call us, people are always feeling that you are trying to be sensationalist, you're trying to get clicks, you're trying to get likes. But particularly at this moment in time, we've got a collective and we're trying to point out the multiple failures of the board and all different facets of the club. It's, of course, on the pitch, bread and butter, that's where we need to be at our best. But when you peel back the curtain, you scratch the surface and you look at all the different things, including the shows that you'll be doing after this one, it builds up a big picture about the care and attention that goes into the club. So I was passing through Glasgow, and I quite like, much like yourself, like, see if I'm passing and I've got a wee bit of time, as daft and as soppy as it sounds, you know, you've got a real connection at Celtic Park, and it's kind of, I think it's been like a bit of a happy place. It's nice to go a wee wander around there and have a wee look around, and maybe there's people bustling about, and it's memories. It's just a nice sort of wee place to stop by if you can, right? Maybe go and look in the shop, but we don't do that at that moment in time. But it's a bye-bye. It was during the international break the last time round, and I was passing by, and there was a couple of folk milling about, and I thought, I'll go out and have a wee look around. And I just had a general walk around the stadium, and the more I started to see things, because that was when all the chat about the banners aren't up and the place is looking a bit of disarray, I was like, well, let's go and have a wee look at this myself. And the video that you shared was actually it was aimed at just sharing it to a couple of my mates and, you know, the guys of the podcast on the group to say, look at the state of this. You guys obviously shared that. We shared that in one of the group chats that ran around about the fan movement, and I was really quite surprised of the shock factor that it got, because I felt that it was probably quite obvious. We've heard the moans about people saying there's no hot water and anywhere in the stand unless you're in the suites. It's things like that. But when you go and you have a look firsthand, you're like, wow, I can't believe this. So Paddy and I actually decided to go and revisit it and put a wee bit more care and attention, a bit more detail into it, and try and film it and cover it a lot better. And that's on our page at the moment. I would definitely, not for self-serving purposes, I would absolutely encourage, if you haven't seen the video, to go and check it out. It's kind of jokingly called Celtic Park, a unique fixer-upper opportunity. And we really deep dive all the aspects of it. And when you go and have a look at it, it is looking tired. You know, the facade, the Celtic way looks nice when you see those dressed up pictures. You see it at night time, you see it in the Christmas adverts. But when you have a right look around, there is decay there. And that's why we went to go and do it. We wanted to show people, this is our home. It's about putting your best foot forward. First impressions count. It's about being home proud. And if you can't put a wee bit of care and attention into the place that you are, it's your window, it's your shop window. What's that going to say to tourists? What's it going to say to players rolling up? What's it going to say to agents? You know, what's it going to say to the media? What's it going to say to other teams that come to visit you, particularly in Europe? And we just wanted to, as I say, at this time, highlight to the best of our abilities one of the big areas that shows the lack of care of the board. And the response has been phenomenal. people are really sort of latching on. We thought that we'd get criticised, as you say, the people saying, you're just looking for something to moan about. But no, completely the opposite. So it's a pretty mutual feeling.
The timing's been absolutely perfect, and hopefully we can play that video again within this episode, Steve-O, so that people who didn't catch the episode of the Bulletin during the week can see just what we're talking about here.
So here we are, round at the back of the Jock Stein stand, and when you come round here, like anywhere at the stadium on a non-match day, it's not until you see it in the cold light of day, when there's not people bustling around, you start to see the decay, and you start to see how much the stadium desperately needs a wee bit of TLC, much like the way that how we are ran at board level needs a wee bit of TLC for the footballing department. As you can see above, they have still yet to replace the banners that once adorned there. And in fact, if you want to know where they are, well, there they are right there. They've been taken down and they're lying beside a couple of storage units, discarded, thrown to the side. It just shows, it's small things, but it just shows you the level of care or lack thereof that there is. It's quite embarrassing. Now, I know these are wee small, tiny details, but how long have we been saying that the stadium needs upgraded, we need to have a wee bit of pride in our home? Celtic certainly don't look like they're home proud. You know, they're failing us with the basic things such as the amenities in some of the stands is shambolic. It needs modernised, but even just a fresh lick of paint or a couple of new banners, something to make it look a wee bit rejuvenated for the new season. And here we are, now in the international break, and they still haven't even done the basics of dressing up the outside of the stadium. And as I say, I mean, this is absolute minute stuff. This is hardly the biggest concern for Celtic at this moment in time, but it just paints a picture. It's about a lack of care of the very basics of Celtic, world-class basics, as they say. You know, and when you have a wee walk around the sort of outside of the stadium, it's, and I know you'll get this at most grounds, well, maybe you won't if you get down to some of those big grounds down south, but it's a bit of a tipping ground. I mean, look at this, we've got an apparent, how long's this been here? An information station, pop-up kiosk, just thrown there, in there with all the other storage things for match days, whatever it is that they hold, just big skips everywhere. It looks like a derelict wasteland at the best of times round here. And that's the thing, you know, if the custodians of the club, those that run the club, those that are upstairs in those offices earning a fortune, if they can't do the basics of just sort of taking care of the home ground of the team, then how can they be trusted to take care of what needs done on the pitch? We're great at generating money, and see if you're not going to spend that money on players, if you're not going to put it out onto the pitch, then at least put a wee bit of care into your home. I mean, again, I say it is basic stuff, and you'll be saying, Steve, what were you moaning about it? But look how tatty this is. This is the entrance to the sports bar in the Kerrydale suite, and it's falling apart. I mean, look at it. You've got signs that have got the framework missing, they're falling down, they're empty. You know, it's just a disaster. It's plastered in a way, ultra fan stickers above it. You know, this is the first thing that people see that are coming to spend their hard-earned money. This is what your people coming for a stadium tour come to see. It looks tatty, it looks tired. As I say, it just paints a picture of where we are in terms of how much we care. I mean, look at that name, the Jock Stein stand. One of the greatest Celtic men there ever was. I mean, you look at that stand, he's got his name on it. It's hardly a tribute to the man, it's actually a wee bit of a redneck. And this is the thing, you know, when we walk around the stadium, it's not until, as I say, you're here in the cold light of day when there's nobody about that you just see how tatty it is, how run down it is. It's essentially what Fergus McCann put here. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And then we look at things like this over here. there it is, the infamous gazebo that we still have because, you know, how long's that been up? That was put up for Champions League. That was put up for the press conferences. And it's still there. Why? What do people at Celtic Park actually do on non-match days? Because it's quite frankly embarrassing that stuff like that's still sitting there. I mean, it's embarrassing the fact that we actually have to use a pop-up gazebo. That when it would be the Champions League, it's not going to be this season, but it would be the Champions League and you've got maybe some of the best players, some of the best managers in world football having to come out to a pop-up gazebo with a generator outside to make sure it's not too cold for them. Come on, it's time to start investing in this club. It's time to start doing everything better. As we said, world-class basics. It seems that we just can't even get the basics of the stadium, of everything. It's really, really poor. And again, as we bring ourselves round the front of the stadium and further round, again, we address these banners for what they are, but tatty, missing, and in some cases torn. You know, first impressions mean a lot. And look at the state of this. It's just embarrassing, and I know I'm moaning about really tiny wee things here, but it just paints a picture. Paints a picture of where the club are at. There is so little care and love put into our club at this moment in time that it's unbelievable. You know, one side we've got the Jock Stein stand, the greatest Celtic men ever, the Lisbon Lions stand, and then round, as we know, towards the North Curve. This is hardly a fitting tribute to these people, these great Celtic men, these great players, great manager. More importantly, they're not providing for a great fan base.
And I think one of the biggest issues is that when you're at Celtic Park on a match day, the place is mobbed. You're not looking for it. And you know, you do see some of the elements higher up, but not to the same degree. And I think when I was doing the Wonder, down Janefield Street, and you know, graffiti would appear on the breeze block, grey walls, and then it would just be basically defaced by more paint and all the rest of it. And you've seen how little care and attention was being shown to the stadium, but also the footprint. So what I want to talk about is kind of my relationship with the stadium, why I think it's important, and what I think the utopia would be, right? Because we keep hearing about world class, right?
You like that?
I like the aspiration. I like the aspiration, right? But I'm going to go back to 1991. Terry Cassidy turns up at Shettleston Town Hall. We showed this last week on the show, right? And he is met by 300 Celtic supporters. To answer questions, it's a Q&A, right? It's a rally, but it's a Q&A with the first ever Chief Executive Officer of Celtic Football Club. Terry Cassidy came in from the cold, if you like. He came into a club that was more or less run by the same few families forever, from year dot, and he's the CEO. And one of the biggest topical discussion points was the stadium. Because at this point, if you imagine, December 91, Celtic have a deadline of the 1st of August 1994. And this is due to the Taylor Report after Hillsborough and also UEFA regulations that if you want to allow people into your stadium, they need to be sitting down. So if you've got an area of your stadium that you've not seated, you can't allow fans in there, and you need to seat all the other bits.
Yeah.
So if we go back to there and we start working our way up to where we are now, right? Because there's a bit of one of them.
Absolutely.
So we're at a point where Celtic Park back in those days, as romantic as we are about it, mate, right? It was tough going, right? But back then it was slightly different in terms of the makeup of the people going to Celtic games and indeed football matches.
Yeah.
It wasn't a family endeavour. I remember, right, here's my experience. Going to my first game, it was called an Old Firm game back then, going to my first game against Rangers, and it was Team Doon Rain. It was a New Year's Day game, Team Doon Rain. I remember it vividly. I remember it vividly because we had a tiny wee bus in a village called Oakley, and the guy that ran the bus was a gentleman called Ding, right? Ding Wright was his name, passed away just recently, so big shout out to his family. And we would we would actually go and pick people up. It was a wee bus, we would go and pick people up. Because it was a New Year's Day, we couldn't get everybody out of their bed. We ended up leaving Oakley with a couple of spares, right? So we go to the game, and you're thinking to yourself, in terms of comfort, mate, you're in a wee rickety wee van driving through to Glasgow for Fife. Didn't always make it in one piece, by the way. It did break down on a regular occasion. So you get to Celtic Park, but there is no comfort. There's no comfort in going to the football back then. Seriously, early 90s, right? Again, the old stories about your old man goes for a jar. Sometimes you get in, sometimes you're standing outside with a packet of crisps and juice. It happened. We were all there at one point. I remember that day, I couldn't tell you what boozer it was in. And I was just sitting on the edge, my dad's sitting next to me, and there was a puggy right next to me. And this guy, right, was about to win the jackpot. And he put his hands over his eyes, goes, right, press that button, me, man. I was like, oh, no, I'm not doing it. Press the button, just press it. I pressed it and he won the jackpot. So I remember all these things, right? So we're in the comfort of this boozer. So the body heat and everything else and the bustle, atmosphere amazing. You get to the stadium and it's freezing, mate. It's freezing. We go to the jungle, right? We go into the jungle to watch Celtic playing Rangers. And the body heat was incredible. Everybody's soaking. And you've got a woolen scarf on. And you know that smell when the wool starts to dry out? And the body odour and the bevy and all the other aromas in and around you.
Bodily
and it's rising. It's getting warmer and it's rising. And that's Celtic Park for me. You're standing, people are urinating where they stand, people are smuggling bevy in and drinking carryouts and all this kind of stuff. I know the alcohol ban happened in 1980. People would smuggle stuff in, they still do.
Aye.
Still do. And I'm looking about thinking, thinking back, it was normal then, but it wasn't a comfortable place to be, let's be honest, right? So Terry Cassidy, December 91 now. I'd need to check if this was the 92 New Year or the previous. I think it might have been actually. So a little after this meeting that he had, it's talking about the stadium, right? He's talking about the upkeep, the current upkeep of the stadium, and the fact that we need to either rebuild or regenerate the stadium by the 1st of August 94. So for me, that's almost like ground zero. There's your starting point, right? We know they failed. We know that the Rob Royston plan failed and the Canvas Lang plan failed.
Yep.
It all failed. But just recently, when I was doing research for that particular show last week, because I'd done a couple of voiceovers, and I tried my best not to sound like McIlvany, and I think I failed, is the actual Canvas Lang plans. You remember it?
The Canvas Lang was massively published.
Yeah.
That was like, it's happening. I remember the picture with the big field standing there.
Yes, it is like that. He does the Bruni before the Bruni existed. And actually going into that Celtic View copy that you're talking about, you go into the middle pages and there's a double page spread on what it's going to look like. But then what it does, it tells you all the facilities. Check it out on the Celtic Wiki, right? It tells you all the facilities, right? I'm not saying that the Celtic Board were visionaries by any manner of means, but you look at a lot of the facilities, we still don't have them. In 2025, Steve-O, we still don't have them. So all of that didn't happen. Fergus came in, he decided we're not going anywhere. This is our spiritual home. Let's rebuild it. And what we got during that 94-95 season when I was at Hampden as a season ticket holder is the Phoenix rising from the flames, if you like. And it wasn't finished in one season. You had the temporary stand, we had all that stuff, right? But what he gave us was what we've learned, phase one. So Tom Grant came on the show. He was a stadium manager at the time. He was on the old board and he was on the new board, and he was the stadium manager when we rebuilt the stadium. But what he explained to us is that was phase one. There was always plans for phase two, which was the aesthetics of the concourses, for example. Right. And when you're walking up the stairwells, it's not a concrete graveyard. We are celebrating history. None of it's been done. None of it. So we're talking 95-96 season, and you jump forward 30 years now, none of that's been done. So they're living off the vision of Fergus McCann to this day. Right, we can come back to the Celtic way. I think that'll be another thing. But that's where we are in terms of the changes I've seen to Celtic Park. I remember the new fascia, right? Because my first game was in 1987. I remember the Glasgow Garden Festival. I remember the People's Palace Museum. It was a centenary, all that stuff. And this new fascia at Celtic Park. But that's still there. That was 1987. So in terms of a maintenance project, we've done none for 30 years almost.
I mean, when you put it like that, it's quite stark. You know, and I mentioned before on a couple of things that I've been talking about around our stadium, was we've had Fergus McCann visit numerous times for various purposes to Celtic Park, and I would genuinely be a really, really interesting interview to ask him
I know.
what he thinks, because we know what he's like. He's quite a cutting and honest guy. I think he'd give you a right honest assessment of what he's seen, because very little, bar as we said, the Celtic way and the removal of the old school and the old ticket office, generally nothing really has changed. There's maybe some obviously superficial changes, you know, there's been different seats and, you know, things like that, the sponsors in the seats and all that garbage, new dugouts and all that, but in terms of the actual
Like changing
makeup,
curtains.
exactly, there's nothing. It really is small cosmetic things that have changed. They'll have changed the wallpaper, they'll have changed the carpets, and maybe changed the seats and the lounges. I don't think a lot will actually have been changed whatsoever. But as you said, when you look at it, you think of stage one, and we always strong, but I don't know what they call it now, if it's a grade one. It used to be a 5-star stadium, right? Celtic Park are so short in so many things that they will never ever reach that stage. It's highly unlikely unless they've done some serious redevelopment that Celtic be able to do it. Simple things like the dressing room's not being big enough, the tunnel being too narrow, no office spaces to the canned delegates, whether it's SPFL, whether it's UEFA, whoever. Till these things are in place, you will never see a major European final at Celtic Park, which is quite galling when you think of the fact of the sheer capacity and it being, you know, larger than the actual national stadium of Scotland, which is pretty shameful. If you think about it, if you do that wee bit of investment to upgrade, to bring it into the 21st century, to actually make it a modern, you know, fit for purpose stadium, you will get money back by the likes of these things, because you'll get concerts, you'll get big artists wanting to come put concerts on, you'll get European finals, you'll get all these kind of things that will go in your favour, and it'll bring in money along with it. You know, we look at things like Commonwealth Games and that come back to Scotland. Are Celtic going to stick their hand up again and say, oh, we'll host that, can you give us some more money, please? If you've done it beforehand, you have more chance of getting these things.
Absolutely.
It's about football, yes, but it's also about being a venue and a destination beyond that.
You know, if we go back to Fergus, I think they're spot on. There's also the question of access to the dressing room underground. You need to have the bus capability, like Hampden. Hampden's got it. You can drive right under the stadium, and then you then get led, or you take a lift to the dressing rooms. So we don't have that at Celtic Park, right? And as part of the redevelopment of the south stand, the main stand, we could have all of the above.
Absolutely.
All of
Of course
it,
we could.
right? So we'll go back to Fergus and we think, right, okay, Fergus's legacy is this incredible beacon of success. It rose like a phoenix with the flames, you know. What is the legacy of the current Celtic board? Because what have they done? You mentioned Commonwealth Games there, right? So what have they done in terms of upkeep? Oh, it's really just the basic upkeep, which, by the way, would be a huge operation in itself, right?
Of course.
Stadium that size. But obviously we've got the Celtic way. So I'm thinking Fergus McCann's legacy is the stadium. What's the current incumbent's legacy? Because at the moment, it's sort of allowing that legacy to crumble, right? And we call it paradise. You know, I used to watch the old history videos. It was like moving from the graveyard to paradise. Celtic Park being our second stadium. There was a newspaper, I don't even think it was a headline, but that was the quote. And from there, we've called it paradise, a dear old paradise, and that's what we call it. It's marketed as paradise. It doesn't look like a paradise to me.
No, it's aging, it is crumbling. What's their legacy in terms of input? Well, there's a nice new car park outside that they can park their briefs in. There's a couple of porta cabins on some, you know, type 1 that they call the ticket office. And, well, if they've done something to the facade and the interior of the superstore, get the bunting out, it's brilliant. And other than that, that's the reality. Maybe you could argue the toss about the introduced, and we're quite forward thinking with the standing section.
Yeah.
That might be it. But in terms of it, they will point to their legacy as being trophies, victories, financials. And that just won't cut it. Yes, we are massively grateful. Let's not take away from the success, but it's just a coverall. As we say, it's not until you find yourself asking questions and you feel like you're getting let down. It's a culmination. This situation we find ourselves in at the moment, the collective, and that, it's a culmination of things. It's just the blowing point. Everybody thinks it's about that Cara Almaty result. It's not. That was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Tipping point.
And you look at these things, and it surprises me that these guys don't want to actually think about, when I walk away, will I be looked upon as being fondly? You all say Fergus McCann deserves to be immortalised in bronze out in the Celtic way. He's that big a character, or have a stand named after him. I can guarantee you 10, 20, 30 years time, nobody will be talking about anybody previous since Fergus left or current on this board that will be looked upon in that light.
Well, I'm going to go back to a project I was involved in. It was never completed because the two individuals were incredible Celtic historians and authors who have since passed. It was David Potter and Tom Campbell. And I was the editor of this project that they were pulling together, where we've seen the greatest Celts, we've seen the books, the greatest ever Celts, the greatest ever goal scorers, all this stuff. So they decided between them they were going to try and compile the greatest ever Celts. So you don't have had to have played for the club. You could be, you know, Brother Wilfred, you could be Fergus McCann, you could be a fan, a super fan that became synonymous with the club. And the point you made right there, so Fergus is in it. Is any member of the current board in it?
Absolutely not.
100's greatest ever Celts?
I mean, I'm not saying this, no one misconstrue what I'm about to say here. Two people who have had overarching influence are Fergus McCann, of course, but currently Dermot Desmond and Peter Lawlnight. Now, I want those two guys away from the club. I'll be totally blunt about it. I understand the logistics and the difficulty when it comes to Dermot Desmond, right? Peter Law thinks long outstayed he's welcome, but these are two guys who have literally got to that stage where they've outstayed their welcome so much where they become the villain. Now, we all say and you say, these guys are Celtic fans. They might not act like it, but what they've done is they've diverted away. I remember the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed young Peter Law when he comes into Celtic. And you think to yourself, this guy's forward thinking. I always remember on years gone by were times we were kind of like applauding Peter Law, and it was kind of like a joke figure. Peter Law's lording it over everybody in Scottish football, but that's quickly turned because I think what these guys have done is they are fans, but they have split that element where it's just totally about the business. I understand you can't run a club, a football club, as a fan and make all your decisions with your heart and not your head. I get that. Your heart needs to be a wee bit in those decisions. And that's why none of those guys, despite having massive influence on Celtic, won't be looked upon fondly. There will be people, of course there will in our fan base, and you see it, some people want to call them happy clappers or whatever term they want, who just can't see by anything that anybody does at the club, so long as you're winning. But those people that look upon them and hold them up on that pedestal still, they're like almost non-existent. So I don't think those guys...
A lot of it's generational, Steve, isn't it? And I'm not being ageist, but a lot of it is generational with regards to that unending support.
And other than being a footnote on some notes about the history of the club, no one's really singing their praises massively to the same way that you'll get like a Brother Wilfred, a Willie Maley, you know, some of the great players, or even a Fergus McCann. Nobody's looking at them in that light.
No, even Robert Kelly, who became Sir Robert Kelly, in the Celtic history, there are moments that you focus on his contribution to the football club, and in a positive way. So I think they do need to think about legacy. There's no doubt about it. If you think about people in a non-footballing sense who have made such an impact that you're still talking about them 30 years later or 100 years later, McCann's in that bracket. Obviously, Brother Wilfred's in that bracket. Non-football people, right? So you look at the board at the moment, you think, right, the decisions you're making now aren't for the here and now. They're for the next generation. We're talking 25 years, 50 years, 100 years, right? This isn't going to be somebody who makes YouTube videos in a few years' time looking at a mothballed stadium because we overspent on it, right? It's not going to happen. No. Celtic are going nowhere. They seem to suffer a PTSD from 1994 and 2012, where it holds them back, Steve. And I look at the inbuilt advantage that we've had over everybody in Scottish football, but in particular, both versions of Rangers, when you think of the capacity of the stadium being 10,000 more seats, therefore, every season, sell more season tickets, right? And it's an inbuilt advantage. Let's do it again. Because I get to the point where, and I'm going to go to the meeting minutes that Michael Nicholson had that meeting, of course, the famous whiteboard with a highlighted post-it note on it.
Talk to fans.
CSA affiliation, all that kind of stuff. Now, I get that he might have said it kind of like tongue in cheek and all the rest of it, but it didn't land well, did it?
No.
And you think about that particular meeting And the fact that the question was raised, are you going to be investing in the stadium? And the answer, not whilst we're in Scotland. Now, I found it really interesting that he would mention that, because straight off the bat, I'm thinking, right, the opportunity to play your domestic football outside of Scotland has not been on the table for some time.
Yep.
In my Celtic supporting life, it was spoken about at these meetings that I referred to, the Brian Dempsey and Terry Cassidy in the 1990s, where there was a proposal prior to Sky coming into the English First Division, as it was then called, where there would be more of a British league. It was called a British League and a British Cup, or maybe a British Cup to start with. What we then seen was the advent of the Premier League in England, because back then you could have had a Scottish team in the English League. That all changed in 1998, and you learn all the different opportunities that we had as a football club to play outside of Scotland. So pre-Fergus McCann takeover, there was talk about us playing our football in England.
The Atlantic League as well.
The Atlantic League. I'm going to go a wee bit further back. Davy Hay spoke about it after the League Cup final in 1986, which was called the Skull Cup final back then, right? And that was the game that the refereeing performance was horrendous, Steve-o, right? To the point where Tony Shepherd was accidentally sent off and then told to come back on, right, by the referee. And there was, if you look at the back pages of the sports paper back in the day, it was probably the Daily Record, Record Sport. Davy Hay, we're going to leave Scottish football and play. We should play football in England. So it's been there. It's been there.
It's a constant.
It's a constant, right?
threat that's never happened.
It is. It is. And then we did our interview with both Paul Smith and David Lowe, where they talk about Operation Strawberry, which was to buy Wimbledon Football Club, move lock, stock and barrel, everything, change everything so that we're in the English League. So he changed the name from Wimbledon to Celtic FC. The home address goes for Wimbledon. I think it was, they were sharing with Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park to Glasgow. And then you change the colour of the kits from blue to green and white hoops. All of a sudden you're playing in the English League. These things have all happened. And then,
would you have been the same club though?
By the way, Steve-o, you'd have had two clubs concurrently. So the Scottish version of Celtic would have been your feeder club. So, I mean, it makes sense. Would you have wanted to give that up just to play in England? I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure that's
a good idea, but I think it's one of those questions where we ask ourselves, if you were liquidated in the same club, you'd still...
Exactly.
Aye.
I know. I mean, you can then, if you're Wimbledon, but just under a different name, I mean, I don't think it would have washed.
I don't think you'd buy into it.
No, they tried.
Yeah.
They tried. And then the 1998 World Cup happens, and then they changed the rules, right? So the cross-border rules. So then you move into the realms of Alan MacDonald, which was the Transatlantic League, where they were talking about, and actually when you look back in it, it makes more sense than the Operation Strawberry, right? So you've got like Belgium, the Netherlands, you've got countries like this, right? And whereby you can be promoted in and relegated out of this hub. So if you're Celtic and you're rotten that season, you get relegated, whoever wins the Scottish League can get promoted. You know, so there was a movement.
Not the worst idea. Again, of course, now in the current state of play with football and stuff like that, is the big superpower teams are not going to allow it to happen. So
no,
that's the problem.
Well, my argument has been since that minutes was released was the fact that all this dreaming about playing your football elsewhere, just be a Champions League club and you get that, right? So last season you get 10 games.
It is. It's kind of like a pseudo Super League, international European, with the extension, one big table. So it kind of is. And yeah, it's a small, I'd call it a mini season, but it is the opportunity, and it's the only real tangible one that's going to be there, because we've seen previously the idea of the breakaway league getting completely kiboshed. So the reality is it's probably not going to happen in our lifetime, at least I would imagine. But that is your opportunity, and that's what we should be looking at and treating at it.
So what they're saying to us then, Steve-o, because I agree, it won't happen, right? You're never going to get your new stand, because whilst we're in the Scottish League, we're not going to invest in it.
The thing is, and I've said this, and I mentioned it on the video that we spoke about earlier on, as much as I would love to see, you know, all the way around the complete and extended, I'm also not foolish to the reality. Now, I've sat here and I'll always hold the board to account, and I'll always push them to try and spend more money. And I think it's an easy go to us as fans to turn around and say, no, if you build it, they will come. Of course they will, right? But again, to bring it back to real basic stuff, is the cost of things change. You want to do your driveway, you want to put a 6-foot fence around your house, not right? Like these things cost a lot of money, right? So you think about putting an extra 10, 20,000 on a stadium. how much that's going to cost. Tens of millions, could even be reaching 100. I'm not an expert by any sense of imagination, but you've got to ask yourself and say, right, okay, what's the reality of doing that? How could we achieve that? You could do it by trying to get in external investors, whether that is naming rights, whether that's bigger sponsors. I know folk don't like that, but if you want it and that's the end goal for you, you've got to be realistic that that's probably the way to unlock that. But I've always championed there is ways that they could improve it. Even the likes of trying to adjust the relief of the stadium, to redeck it out with more seats. You would probably squeeze in an extra couple of seats here or there. The likes of, I've said as well, improving the facade, knocking out, building out, knocking through walls, making the communal areas bigger. There's multiple ways to improve the stadium and the fan experience. For me personally, I'd love to see the extension thing and the 2-deck like old stand, if you want to call it that, but I don't think it's realistically feasible because of what I've just said and how long that would take for them to get their money back, because they're looking at bottom line, they're looking at figures, and that's what they want. And when you think about it, just based on those season tickets and buying and getting the increased capacity, you are a long way away to get to. Because think of how much money we've got in the bank and how much we've grown, right? Think how long it's taken us to get that. Go and spend it all and see how long it takes you to get it back. So that's the balancing act. But there's no excuse for remedial work elsewhere and improving. And as I say, even like the changing the relief of the old stand to try and get in some more seats. I know folk don't like it, but look at what Rangers done. They managed to get, within the confines of what they've got, some slightly extra capacity.
You know, I was talking to Kev Graham, long-time contributor of Celtic State of Mind. First episode we ever did, it was me and Kev, and he was talking about come up with the wildest idea possible and then work your way down. So have that utopia. What is the world-class stadium? And then let's start getting realistic. And I don't think Celtic have got that way of thinking. They almost think, right, what's the cheapest option and let's work our way up. So when I also think about where we are with the stadium, I agree with you. There's so much, even if they were just to look at the footprint and they were to look at the space within the stadium, so much that they could do better. But let's talk about the inbuilt advantages, the financial advantages, rather than the cost, and what the best case scenario would be, right? So again, I don't visit a lot of football stadiums, but maybe once a season I'm down south and I'll go to the stadium that's closest to where I'm based. And in the last few seasons, I've been to Liverpool and I've been to Spurs. Now, you can almost move Spurs out the equation.
Yeah,
it's
just
like
completely brand new.
It's like building a stadium on Mars kind of thing. But I was at Anfield in 1990, and then I was there again in 2023. And I spent loads of time, and this was night time where, yeah, the stadium was open for a function, but it wasn't a match day or anything, walking about Stevo, because it looked sensational, right? Also, Stamford Bridge fairly recently, and I did the same. And it was about how they were celebrating, I'm no lover of Chelsea, by the way, but how they celebrated the history of their football clubs, right? So I think to myself, right, I might be a football fan coming into Glasgow, thinking to myself, right, I'll go and visit Celtic Park. I'm a tourist. And I could walk around Celtic Park, and other than a wee plaque on the outside of the building, Tommy Burns doesn't exist, right? Jimmy McGrory doesn't exist. John Thompson, who gave his life for Celtic, doesn't exist. You celebrate all these figures, you celebrate them. So when I was doing the Wander in Paradise, one thing that constantly annoyed me was the Jane Field Street, where obviously Fergus didn't get permission to build on the actual road. So the stand is built above it.
Hangs over.
But what it means is there's 32 panels of breeze block which have been unchanged. Maybe there's been an exit sign put up or whatever, unchanged in 30 years. And what I said was, you've got to celebrate your history. Imagine that being lighted properly, lit properly. It could be screens, it could be murals, it could be decals, but let's celebrate Celtic history. At every single inch of that stadium footprint, right, celebrate the history. Be that in art or in bronze statues or interactive displays or screens. And then you've got all the area where we don't have anything. It's a concrete graveyard.
It's like a wasteland.
Hotels, museums, fan zones, bandstands. There is scope to do all of that at Celtic Park, right? And that's before you even look at the main stand.
Yeah.
So make the footprint something to be proud of. Make it world class. Make the place look like paradise. Tom Grant said a great thing, which I had never thought about, I'd never considered it. He wants everybody flying into Glasgow to see Celtic Park and go, what's that? From above. Let's do something with the lights all the way around the stadium so that you're like, wow, that's Celtic Park.
You see that with the hydro?
Yeah.
The way that's, you know, and that's a lot of things that the comments will be coming out when we've been doing shows. I've seen on yours, and a lot of people saying that. These are things that you can, you know, quite easily do. Don't get me wrong, I'm not foolish. These things cost money, of course they do. When you've got such a big area like Celtic Park and such a big building, to do works on it isn't going to be cheap. But when you offset that, don't go and buy a Quan, or don't go and buy a Tillio for that one season and use that money to do things in and around the stadium. You know, it's the basics, and it could make a big difference. And the area that you're talking about, we covered that when we went down through the video, and we said the exact same thing. And when you get down there, it's barren, with simple things, broken signs, things are missing, you know, place a mess. There's an actual advertising board that says treble, treble. That's still there. And then there's another one from a couple of sportswear range or whatever it was that we're trying to sell a couple of seasons ago. It's just basics that's there. And we said the exact same thing. Get up displays, or we look inside the area of the concourse where the fans have done some phenomenal murals and stuff. Make people feel more involved. That whole area could be lit up. It could be, you know, murals. It could be, you know, these kind of wraps. It could be, you know, digital displays, whatever. You could really dress the place up. And it is, you know, as cosmetic. It doesn't suddenly make it, wow, it's unbelievable. But there's a lot of things that you can do that aren't expensive that would make a massive difference. And you're talking about other stadiums. Another classic is when you look at Arsenal, for example, like the big wall with all the supporters' flags over the years and things, ex-players and that. You know, these are quite inexpensive installations to put in, but it just creates an environment. And we also mentioned teams like Wrexham, who have had, they understand they don't have the money and stuff that Celtic got despite their backing, but they would have almost like marquees and think of like a wee sort of mini market type thing in and around the footprint of the stadium, because they recognise that we don't have the money to go and extend the stadium. So how can we get people coming on the footprint of the stadium earlier? You go to the sports bar, and it's actually one of the few good things in Celtic Park. And again, you look at it and you go, it's quite small. You should be looking at it and thinking, get that extended, get that bigger. And again, I'll refer to it, 'cause people don't like it, but I always have to hammer home. Look at the team across the city, who are, we're always told are completely skint, but look at the improvements that they've done. You know, hospitality suites, restaurants, Edmiston House, all well skint, the tunnel, extra seats, all well skint, by the way. And as much as we'll laugh and scoff at Edmiston House, it's a destination, it's a hub, and by the way, they're carrying it game after game in that place. Why can't Celtic go and do something like that?
Without a doubt, Steve, all right. And then I also think that when they're looking at the why nots, let's look at what it does bring, right? So apparently there's been a study done, a feasibility study. They reckon it was 100 million quid, but that's only going to go up, right? Now, I always talk about Aston Villa, because I know that there was a few members of Celtic staff, not players, who have gone down to Villa, now work down there. And there's an interactive display that will be on their social media pages of a new main stand which costs £100 million, and they showed you how it was going to actually be built and how they were going to do it in the least disruptive way possible. We ran a few figures on Celtic season ticket holders versus capacity without the main stand, and also the deterioration or the non-renewal of Celtic season tickets season on season, I think, is between 1% and 3%.
Right, okay.
So within 2 or 3 seasons, right, you would get to a point where you could fill the rest of the stadium with season ticket holders without anybody in the main stand, right? It might mean that you're not letting many or any opposing fans into your stadium until the works are done, right? So you could get to a point...
Must.
Yeah, exactly. You could get to a point where, yeah, there's a few people that might have to move. My season ticket's in the main stand. Would I move knowing that it's going to get rebuilt? 100%, right? And you get moved into another part of the stadium and you get a 50 quid voucher for the Superstore, which a lot of people never even spent after the COVID season, right? So that happens. And then you obviously have the cost. We've spoken to people who know a lot more about finance than I do in relation to how to finance this. It's not like looking at that 80 million in the bank saying, we're going to spend it.
Yeah.
So you can be financed, you could take a loan out, all these different things. But it's almost as if the club looks at all the why nots And what I think about is, right, what does the capacity go to? Once that, see you level it out, what does it go to? And the feasibility study reckons it's around the 68 to 70, so it's not a massive amount.
But enough that you'll see the benefits.
You'll see the benefits. And it's not just the benefit of the season ticket that you can sell, but the average match day revenue that you generate from that season ticket as well, whilst there's no boycotts taking place. Also, Willie Hockey said something really interesting to me the other week when I was speaking to him. We're going about the waiting list, the season ticket holder waiting list. He says there's a corporate waiting list of 3,000. Corporate. Now, you know what?
That's where the money's at. I know
Where the money is.
people argue not real fans, but at the end of the day, from a strictly making, heavy cash, that's the way. Aye.
So you're looking at more executive lounges, more boxes, etc., etc. So straight off the bat, you could work out, Steve-O, pound for pound, how long it would take you to get your investment back. You could do that. But in the meantime, if you finance it properly, it's not going to affect your plan in terms of what you're going to put on the pitch.
Yeah.
So back in the day, I'm talking about your Cassidys and your Dempseys and all this stuff. It was one or the other. You spent it on the players or you spent it on the stadium. We can do both.
Of course you can.
We can do both, right? Then it opens up some of the things you said, some of the elements, right? So first gig I ever went to, Celtic Park, 1993 to see U2, right? When they were cool, if they ever were, right? Zoo TV. We don't do gigs anymore. Why? Well, there's a reason why. And it came out when Don Mackay, who now runs like SECC,
Yeah, that's right.
you've seen him giving a wee plaque to Mick Hucknall recently. I don't know if you saw
They're not
that.
bad for a guy that apparently wasn't good at his job, eh?
70 odd days he lasted. I think he signed off kneecap. Well, that's good enough for me. Right, so you look at the gig situation, and he, I assume, was, or as far as I'm aware, was looking at getting gigs back into Celtic Park, because you think of additional revenue, you think of inbuilt advantages, and you say, well, who's played at Celtic Park in the past? The Who, Prince, U2, Bryan Adams, Rod Stewart. These guys have all played there in the past. And you imagine, well, Oasis just had the biggest grossing tour in a long, long time in the last year. Imagine bringing them to Glasgow, imagine bringing them to Celtic Park. Why not? It generates huge revenue streams.
Massive.
Right? But you can't do it. And the reason you can't do it, and this is on good authority, is because in order to build the stage, which would be different from the stage that was built for the opening ceremony that obviously was at Celtic Park, they built a stage for the music and the cranes and all that required. We don't have
The access space.
the access. We don't have the access for it. So if you were going to do the main stand, you would build that in to allow you to then make more revenue. You've got the corporate boxes, more revenue, more seats, more revenue. And I think to myself, in terms of, let's stop thinking short term. Let's think about the next 30 years.
Yeah.
How long does it take to pay it off? Well, we had a cooperative loan for decades, right? Didn't affect our success. Didn't affect our success in the slightest. Then you get to the front of it, and I keep saying this, the Las Vegas Stadium, I shared it on Twitter, everybody thought I was nuts, right? With the screens, the media mesh, right? So we're moaning and complaining about banners, Steve-O. Banners.
I know.
Seriously, it's not the 1950s here. Let's get media mesh in the front of the stadium, because not only can you celebrate the history of the football club, I keep saying McStay's pass to Morris can go right round the stadium. You can advertise.
That's it.
Advertising space. You can, it becomes self-sufficient.
I just, on that, and it's something again that I've always says, wouldn't it be great if we had people at arm's reach that had a wee bit of knowledge about these things? That's right, Chris Trainer. Forest Media sits there with a decent shareholding, and as we said, sold Forest Media. But you go and you look at those digital advertising boards, and there'll be a wee red square at the bottom, Forest Media.
Yeah.
That was Chris Trainer. Wouldn't it be great to tap into somebody like that who also...
Does he know how to replace a banner?
Well, that's the thing, I don't know, but it's just these guys are at arm's reach, and that's one of the questions that I would be asking. I don't know what these guys have, the backgrounds is. Maybe they don't want on the board because they're elsewhere represented, they can't be on too, and so on and so forth. But that's a guy who we're talking about maximising potential, and from an advertising space, pretty sure he might even be able to get a good deal on it,
Exactly.
And then we talked again about the now defunct idea of the hotel and the museum. Again, Forest Hotels, Chris Trainer, Radisson Red, big hand in that. You know, tap into these guys. These things can all happen if you try and get external investors. You want a hotel, you go to a company, you pitch it, we'll build it, you take it over, you run it. I know I'm making it sound really easy, and it isn't that easy to do, but why are you not exploring it? You know, I always stayed as well, and a lot of folk might not like the idea. I was quite surprised over the years that the Emirates and Celtic Park never tried to come together as like a campus type thing. You know, there is opportunity if you want to find it. I just feel that this board always settle for the bare minimum and everything. It's like the sponsorship deal with Adidas. Who takes on a 10-year deal? It's bananas. Are you trying to tell me that with your stock, with your background, that you're selling your power of, you know, a brand, that you couldn't get a better deal looking elsewhere or force the arm? We commit to a 10-year deal. But that's Celtic all over the bat. And again, to bring it back to the stadium, it's reflective of that. Just doing the status quo and being happy with it and not realising that eventually that starts to wear away and it deteriorates.
The thing about vision, right, that I want to talk about as well, Steve, if you imagine the vision of Fergus, and I say this all the time because I was an avid reader of the fanzines at the time, and I kept as many of them as I possibly could. And I sometimes go back because it's interesting to see what was the attitudes of that era. And I remember in the first, maybe even the first edition of Not the View, 1987, we're talking so far ahead of the curve, it's unreal. That's why it was a pleasure and a privilege to bring the guys on the show just recently. They were talking about a new stadium. They were talking about floating the club, going public. I'm like, what does that even mean? It's not like back, you know, nowadays where you go, right, what does it mean for a football club? You didn't know. They were informing you through the pages of a fanzine, a photocopied fanzine, and they were informing you that these are the things, these are the big pillars that Celtic need to be aiming for. I think we've arrived at that moment again, right? And they were talking back then about a stadium, how much could we fill, right? So they were looking at the average attendances, let's say for the last 10, 15 years. Our average attendances were going from 26 to 38. You know, we were not averaging 54,000 or 60,000 or 58 a season. Nowhere near it. But it took someone with a vision, right? And the normalisation now of season tickets means that you're aiming to sell the season ticket. You understand during the season there are going to be games where people don't go.
But you know what you can get at the front end?
Absolutely. You've got a waiting list, not only of, I think, between 10 and 12, the number kind of varies. 10 and 12,000 on a waiting list, Steve-o. 3,000 on the corporate waiting list, so you could take up to 15,000.
And again, back to what you says about when the feasibility study was done, and it just echoes what I say, all for expansion, but it doesn't need to be major surgery. It doesn't need to be 15, 20,000. It doesn't. You would get the benefits. You could do it at something that would be probably by this board, to count every bean, considered more feasible, more achievable, and better on their pocket. As much as we don't want, that's what they're going to look at. But you've just demonstrated, and that study demonstrated, that you can, without major surgery, get a decent increase in capacity that will pay you back a lot quicker, because obviously the offset, the cost isn't there. But again, if you bring in external investors, you know, even if it's corporate boxes or whatever it is, to say, you'll have the naming rights to them. You know, it's like when you go into the Hydro and you go into the corporate areas there, at periods they've had naming rights on those corporate boxes.
I think I worked out at the time, when I heard the capacity, I worked it out on 70,000, right? And at a cost of 100 million. And then you look at the average revenue per season ticket on match day, when people aren't boycotting the pies, and the season tickets themselves. And it would take 17 years just on that. That's without naming rights, without concerts, without European finals.
And that is the thing. And that's where, again, it's a right balancing act. You know, obviously I would love that, but I also realise that 17 years is a long time to get your investment back. And then you often wonder, well, if they do that, thinking like Arsenal, when they had all the money for the stadium stuff, they really cut the cloth for long, long periods in terms of what they've done elsewhere and on the field. So it's that balancing act to, do you want your cake and eat it kind of thing, you know? So I think there's a middle ground to be found that is acceptable, to push forward, to upgrade, to get more capacity without it being, you know, literally long-term, you know, a bit of sort of long-term pain for, well, eventual long-term gain. There's no short-term pain, it's long-term and long-term.
And that 17 years might end up being 12 years if you take up all the commercial elements
Yeah.
of it as well, hospitality. I wasn't talking about corporate, it was just
Mhm.
bums on season tickets. And then, as I said before, it then gives you a legacy as a CEO or a board to say, look what we've done. We have actually secured this club's future for the next generation. I don't think they've got that long-term vision.
No, they haven't. And that's the thing. It all comes down to communication, consultation. There's a great, you know, there's a great sort of benefit in the board actually asking the fans. Now, they might just completely, as we've seen, and what we've seen with the various times in the current climate, where they will just totally ignore you. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with canvassing and asking the questions to your fan base. What do you want? It's like the idea when the fans went out with the Celtic end, put out to tender, ask folk, what do you think? And get it and say, well, this is the results for that. Ask them, would you be happy for us to spend X million, but it'll take us this period of time to get back? Then you'll know, you'll never be criticised. But at least give you the options and balance it. It doesn't mean because you fought it means it's 100% going to happen, but at least be seen to trying to tap in and asking the fans what they like, what their expectations are, and then hopefully trying to find something that's an acceptable middle ground for both parties. I don't think they'd ever be criticised for that.
No, and it shows that they've got some intent as well, Steve-o. Right, so let's say it didn't come to fruition. The intention is there. You know, it's not just they're giving you lip service. I'm going to ask you about some of the other, what I see as big pillars in the world of Celtic and
Yeah.
stabilising the future and making sure that we continue into the future successfully as well. But on the final note of the season, the redevelopment of the stadium, I think if they failed to do it, right, they probably have a situation where they leave the football club, because they always do. The only constant is the fan. They will leave the football club and they'll say, well, what was their legacy? Or did they just jump behind the wheel and keep the thing going? You know, because at the moment, I'm not seeing it. They pride themselves, and obviously the meeting between the collective and the club is out now on Friday night. It's out there. They pride themselves on saying, we gauge our success on the trophies we win domestically.
That isn't enough, because Celtic have been built on success for generations. Even in barren times, Celtic have still been able to win things. And that's not enough. And they can, you know, toot their own horn, they've been the most successful club in Scotland and all those kind of things right now, but that is part of the business. Celtic are built on winning, and that's the minimum expectancy. They keep on throwing out, as you say, world class. You go into a stadium, go into the dressing room, world class basics. It's just a cover-all phrase that they chuck out there. But what they don't do is, and what they should be doing is giving us something tangible, a plan, a blueprint, a journey. But they won't do that, because that would include putting timescales on it that can be held accountable. I personally don't see this current board having a legacy as such. They will just be literally passers through. That is where I'm at with it. Nobody's going to turn around and rant about the Nicholson era in the same ways people aren't necessarily going to rant about the previous Wally era. As I touched on earlier, there was a period where I thought, this guy's brilliant. Be outstate your welcome. And that's it. You've got to leave at the optimum time. We talk about selling players at the optimum time to capitalise. They also, from a boardroom perspective, there's an optimum point for guys to move on. And if you do that, you'll leave with probably well wishes of the fans.
You're right. I remember reading a book. It was in Spiral Cab. It's on tour in America, and they had the big tour bus. And often the person who was employed to drive the bus would just get a member of the band to sit at the wheel, because there was nothing to do. So you're kind of like freewheeling it down the highway. That's what the Celtic board are doing right now.
You know, we say this, don't fall asleep at the wheel. They are. It's autopilot.
That's what it is.
They've literally went into autopilot. It's the idea of the status quo. If it's not broken, let's not try to fix it. But the reality is, when you dig down, there is many elements that are broken. And again, we've got to split it for the two. From the generalised business point, are we a well-run business? Yes. I wouldn't say we're class leading. I wouldn't say we're elite level. I wouldn't say we are great. We're good. We've got a solid foundation that I'm pretty sure if you switched in another CEO, other board members with good business acumen, the blueprint's there, and they can elevate that and take it further. These guys are just happy to just sit on that. And as I say, the key element, for example, was the Adidas deal. Just it's secure. That's all they want, is secure. They don't want an element of risk for reward.
Even with the Adidas deal, football clubs are getting involved in fashion. I mean, there's so far you can take your kit manufacturer deal fashion-wise, but you know, there's football clubs on this planet who see the benefit of fashion ranges, and we just play at it. I mean, imagine some of the designers that you could get involved in fashion ranges when it comes to global markets. I want to just touch very briefly on some of the other episodes we're going to be bringing up in the next few weeks in terms of the state of the football club. So we've been talking about the stadium, and the utopia is you turn up and it's all singing, all dancing. There's media mesh, there's 70,000, there's everything you can imagine. There's a fan zone. You turn up an hour before kickoff and you're being entertained before you get into the stadium. You know, you turn up on a Thursday, a random Thursday afternoon, and there's things to
The
do.
marquee's known outside.
The marquee. There's gigs at various points during the season, making the money, more income that currently it doesn't have. That's the state of paradise. If we move to the state of the board, right? And a big thing for me is looking at the Celtic board and refreshing it constantly. I think that in all walks of life, Steve-o, that, you know, you need fresh ideas in the room. And what I've seen this week, and don't mind saying it, is there's a culture that runs through where everybody's all very nice, but they're all clones. They're all speaking the same language. It's all corporate word salads. It's all clones. And there's a division between what you and I think and what they think, because they know best.
Of course.
And they all get the medals on the table because this is your success, right? And it's unhealthy. We know the makeup of this culture is because somebody has a dominant share in Celtic, not a major or majority, but a dominant share. And what he says goes. So you end up with club lawyers as CEOs, you know, finance directors becoming CEOs. And it's like what I want in my football club, right? Because it is the fans. It always is going to be the fans. I want somebody with a track record. I want a powerhouse, somebody who can dominate a boardroom, who can dominate a negotiation. We do not have that. No, nowhere near it.
Watery characters is what I'd say. You know, until that meeting, obviously we'll hear more about it. You were there in person. To really find out, I couldn't tell you who Michael Nicholson is as a person. Now, I don't want to come back, so we've criticised him enough, but I think I can contrast and compare against a Peter Wall. Peter Wall's long outstayed his welcome now, but one thing when he was at that peak, if you want to call it, Peter Wall, was you knew that he was maybe a stubborn guy. He had the background, and he'd go in there and you knew that he'd probably dominate a room for right or for wrong. Well, his arrogance, and we've seen that in times where because he loved it, he loved holding court, but there was a presence there for right or for wrong, arrogant, confident, and you can imagine that filtering into, you know, negotiation situations. Sometimes to his detriment, where he's been so arrogant that it's been short-sighted. But definitely...
We talked about John McGinn.
Yes, but definitely not watery and definitely not backing down one way or another.
No.
I just don't see that with the currents.
This is a problem for me, right? It's almost going back to what David Lowe says, a maintenance project where it's like, right, let's just keep this ticking along. This is fine. Didn't overstretch it. You know, let's haggle with Dundee for 200 grand to make sure Luke McCowan signs and all this nonsense, right?
200 grand.
We need a refresh. We absolutely need a refresh. And I think we need to talk the club's language to get it as well. So that's where I am with the boards. I don't think there's a legacy there. I don't think there's a freshness. And I think it comes to a point where it can happen quite quietly and it looks naturally, right? Whereby you look at the makeup of the board, the age profile of some of the members, how long they've been there, and you say it is time, even without all the fan uprising, it is time for these guys to get out. I hope they're not too stubborn to see that there is an opportunity to do it without looking as though they're bowing down.
I think as well, and it sounds horrible to say, but these guys are all getting older. Now, I don't imagine, no matter how stubborn you are, how set in your ways, how long in the tooth you are, this can't be good for your health.
No, no.
I mean, it really can't. And even that natural progression to just say, it's time to step away, you would think that's there. Is it self-awareness or lack thereof? Quite possibly. I just think, you know, it's the problem I've got is if they step away, do I trust? And that will be a big point of the collecting folk and asking, right, get rid of them. Who comes in? Who makes that decision to appoint them? Well, that's not for you or I to decide. You would like to hope, and that's the unfortunate thing, is hope they would make the right decision. but they need exciting, new, vibrant characters, up and comers. Go and pick somebody from what could be whatever club elsewhere that is class leading, it's trailblazing, that's an up and comer. I'll just use Dom Mackay as an example. Folk didn't like him. I felt he was hard done by because he came from a rugby background. He probably needed someone by his side to teach him the ways of football. But the principles of being a CEO are there. You know, you don't go from leaving Celtic apparently in disgrace, right, to being charge of international European rugby, to going to, you know, the Scottish exhibition campus in charge of that.
Yeah.
If you're that bad, like,
Exactly.
let's get real here.
No, 100%. And we'll probably never know the ins and outs of what happened there, Steve-O, which is unfortunate. But interesting times, and we'll cover them blow by blow on a Celtic State of Mind. Now, I need to jump on Celtic World Order a few times to pay you back for this, mate. So I think it's important that we collaborate as platforms for the common goal, which is for Celtic to be as good as they possibly can be.
Yeah.
This world-class thing, great aspiration. What's your strategy? How are you going to reach that aspiration?
It needs to come out. We've heard about the 5-year plan. We mentioned that before. I spoke to Kev Graham about it. The 5-year plan, I've never heard it. I've never seen it. But that is the problem. We need structure. They need to come out. I understand that off the back of the meeting, they've said that they recognise an importance to increase communications with the fan base, whatever that may look like. But base level, it needs to be setting out objectives. Any company will be held accountable by shareholders, fans, you know, supporters, investors, whatever it may be. But you have to have a business strategy. It needs to be clear. It needs to be obvious. Think even like governments will say, this is your vision, 2030 vision, 2040 vision, whatever it may well be, and it's something to work towards. Now, of course, you might get to that point and you're behind the curve on it, but it's about having something to work upon. It's about having something tangible that fans will hold you accountable to it and you can see what's happening. Just to quickly touch on it, when we done the stadium thing, they had been doing the media work. They've been doing painting on the metal work. Is that the reason why the banners are up? More than likely, they could have told us that.
It's so easy to communicate now. Steve-O, an absolute pleasure. Go and check out Celtic World Order, and thank you again for joining me on a Celtic State of Mind.
Pleasure. Never a chore.
Thanks again for joining us on a Celtic State of Mind. Join us next Friday at 6 for This is Acsom.